Okay, this is Dan Whitman in our International Crisis Management course. It is October 13th, Monday, 2025. Today we have two very special things to offer to you. We're going to get to Jack Zetkulic, who will give the bulk of the presentation today. He's asked me to tell an anecdote about cross-cultural communication, and I have many, but I'm going to pick one or two. Before we get to that, a very remarkable colleague, Elena Fonova, who is a senior judge in the economic court based in Dnipro, has offered to give an extra session for those who speak Ukrainian this Wednesday at 10 o'clock. And the subject, I call it FIMI. She has a different way of, she's going to introduce it, but foreign information manipulation and interference. As we all know, Russia has perfected this satanic art. They do it very well, very competently, for very malign purposes. And my hope is that some of us, and particularly people who speak Ukrainian, might be able to actually begin to do some activities that, as far as I know, no government is doing anything about Russian disinformation. They study it, they put it on a graph, they tell where the sources are. I don't consider that doing anything. I consider that just having a look. I think there's an urgent need to enter into social media and to get involved, not just to say this was a lie and that was not true. I don't know how to do this, but Elena Fonova has vast experience in this. And again, we'll give a session on this topic this Wednesday in 2 days, 10 o'clock my time. And Elena, please take the mic and introduce yourself and tell us what we can expect on Wednesday for those who speak Ukrainian. Elena?
Okay, thank you, Dan. I'm Elena Fonova. I'm judge of Commercial Court of Lugansk region.
Sorry, Elena, do you want to unmute your video if you want to? There we go. Now we see you. Okay. It's lovely to see you. Okay. Okay.
Do you hear me well?
Absolutely.
Okay. And this topic very important for Ukraine because it's a very difficult topic, and we know that Russia have a very big money for disinformation. I want to announce my lecture in Ukraine, if you don't mind. Я хочу трохи розповісти про себе. Насправді дуже дивно може звучати, що суддя господарського суду цікавиться темою дезінформації, але мені здається, що ця тема, вона є дуже актуальною для всіх нас, і коли я досить так почала заглиблюватися в цю тему, я насправді трохи жахнулася, тому що ми можемо кожен день споживати певну інформацію і частково це бачити і, можливо, частково усвідомлювати, але насправді масштаби от цього всього, ну, напевно, пересічні громадяни, навіть правники, вони не зовсім усвідомлюють, коли не займаються спеціально цією темою. Тому я для себе вирішила, що важливо, дуже важливо підсвічувати саме це, підсвічувати в українському суспільстві, підсвічувати не тільки в українському суспільстві, а й за кордоном, щоб спільнота, яка має зв'язки з нашими іноземними партнерами і в тих країнах, де відбувається така дезінформація, вони також могли нести цю інформацію, скажімо так, в маси і показувати насправді деструктивну, дуже таку велику деструктивну роль Російської Федерації, її дезінформації не тільки в площині українського контексту, а і її впливу на внутрішні процеси багатьох країн, в тому числі Європейського Союзу, з огляду на ті наслідки, які вони можуть взагалі мати для політики цих держав і для не тільки політики, взагалі для безпечного існування, тобто підтримувати певні сили, в тому числі завдяки цій інформаційним компаніям, дезінформаційним компаніям, які в подальшому можуть деструктивно впливати на розвиток країни. Тому лекція, як на мене, буде досить цікава для тих, хто цікавиться саме цим напрямом. Ми подивимося, як функціонує екосистема російських інформаційних операцій за кордоном. Взагалі йтиметься про взаємодію державних медіа, проксі сайтів, мереж в соціальних платформах, бот-фермах з використанням штучного інтелекту, в тому числі і телеграм-екосистем, про те, хто координує хвилі контенту, як вони спрямовуються на різні аудиторії. До речі, я коли подивилася на певні там дослідження, певні розслідування, то взагалі була дуже здивована, наскільки молоді люди координують такі великі, скажімо так, в обсягах і об'ємні операції саме щодо дезінформації, які алгоритми цього є, але також важливо знати, як цьому протидіяти і яким чином можна, так скажімо так, робити певні практичні контрзаходи. Це все про це все ми поговоримо 15 жовтня на основі прикладів останніх років, 24-го, 25-го років. Також розглянемо дії урядів цифрових платформ, які спрямовані проти таких мереж впливу, які вже підсилені штучним інтелектом. І, до речі, є такий спойлер, напевно, що Російська Федерація, вона навмисно заливає в інтернет дуже багато неправдивих даних для того, щоб штучний інтелект, він же аналізує всі дані, які є в мережі, і щоб він видавав певні, скажімо так, не зовсім актуальні і реальні відповіді на певні питання, зокрема щодо війни з Україною. І я покажу дуже цікавий приклад, як на мене, який про це свідчить. Дуже дякую. Thank you, Dan, and I'm finished.
Дуже дякую, Олена. І дякую, дуже дякую. This is very exciting. If you did not understand what was just said, it's not a problem with your computer. It's that you need to learn Ukrainian very quickly. So I don't know if it's possible to do this in one session, but I would love to think that out of this process, with the wise counsel of Judge Fonova, maybe there could be some activities other than merely understanding and charting this evil stuff which is taking over the world. Thank you very much. And I will be posting in English and in Ukrainian on Google Classroom so that everybody's aware of this. Thank you, Elena. I wish I understood 20%. I wish I could get the 80%. There's a lot to offer. Now,
it's a very big number.
Thank you. I'm very excited, and thank you you're very busy, by the way. Everybody should know. Judge Fonova does not have time to do this, but she's doing it. So we really thank her. Now, we turn to cross-cultural communication. Jack has suggested that I have many anecdotes, but I can think of one of where the risk of getting it wrong can really hurt you. Now, we all do cross-cultural communication every day. If you go on a metro, on a bus, if you go to a store, even if you're in your own ethnic group, there will be obstacles to very good communication. One example, I worked in Madrid. I was a junior press officer. My boss, who was an idiot, never took the trouble to understand the Spanish culture. The Spanish colleagues that I had and we kept telling him, when you go to lunch, do not discuss business until dessert. The Spanish culture considers it very offensive to sit down to a lunch and to an editor of a newspaper for the purpose of complaining and to say, now about that editorial, nothing more insulting. And we kept telling him this over and over, but he never listened. And in Spanish, there's this expression, llegar a los postres, to get to dessert, which means to get to the point. Spain is a fascinating mixture of a to-do culture and a to-be culture. Jack will tell us about that distinction. Cultures that where people communicate with one another. To establish a communication, you must first establish who you are before you get to anything related to business. I was raised in such and such a town. I'm from such a family and such. My boss, Paul, never got it. And the proper way to do this, Spanish lunches are famous for being long. They last minimum 2 hours, sometimes 3. You talk about the family, you ask about personal things in order to establish a relationship. Once you've done that, then you can turn to the business at hand when the dessert arrives and not before. Jack, that's my anecdote. Now over to you.
Okay, hi Dan and hi everybody. I will follow up with a lunch analogy as well. When quite the opposite of Dan's experience in Madrid, when I was working at our embassy in Stockholm, once a month I would have lunch with the political director of the foreign ministry. We would always eat at the Opera Källaren, the opera restaurant. He would always order the same meal called the white meal of baked white fish, cauliflower, and white potatoes. And I would, order something else. And he would have his list, I would have mine. The meeting would take 60 minutes from beginning to end. The lunch would be 60 minutes from beginning to end. If it went to 61 minutes, he would be offended. And I never learned anything about him personally.
So there's the opposite. The point being, it's always relative. One must take the time and effort to learn because there are no universal rules. Jack, are you seeing my screen?
Yes, I'm looking at your beautiful face.
Oh dear, that's not good.
But that's
Uh,
okay. I can talk about
no.
what I'm going to talk about.
I want the share screen function seems to
Ah,
not be working. Let me try again. Let me go back. Okay. Um, okay, share. There we go. Share screen. Okay. Are you seeing my screen now?
I'm seeing a words that say Dan Whitman has started screen sharing. Oh, there it is. Good. Okay.
Oh, I'm so relieved. Okay,
Yeah,
there we are.
they're my little happy people.
There we are. So
Okay.
far happy. No
Okay.
misunderstandings quite yet. Okay.
So everybody, we only have about an hour to talk about a subject that I know could take a minimum of a semester in university classes. But what I'm going to be doing with you is doing a very quick history of how cross-cultural communication has been studied over time, and then talk about what culture is, where does it come from, how do we get it, then talk a little bit about the clash of cultures, first internal, that is the clash of cultures that occur inside an individual, and then external when they occur between people from different backgrounds. We'll talk briefly about yellow. We'll talk.
Okay. Everyone's muted. Go ahead. Oh. Uh-huh. Um, this is not good, folks. Jack, you're on. Go ahead.
Okay. So we'll talk about yellow and red flags, but then we'll segue into professional applications. That is to talk about working effectively across cultures, which all of us do on a regular basis. Throughout this, I would like you to think about, while I'm talking to you and giving you examples and throwing a lot of information at you, think about your own experiences. with cross-cultural communication in your professional work, in your personal lives. And please feel free to text your comments. I might not have time to address them all, but they'd be interesting to see. And please feel free to email me with questions. And if you would like, you can email me with any of your personal experiences, like the one that Dan just gave as his personal example, because I do write about this topic, and every time I talk with a class, I learn something new, and it would be great to have your own experiences. So Dan, I'm going to learn how to advance to the next one. I think I'm trying to hit my down button, but it's not really working.
Okay, if that doesn't, let me, once again, let me make you a co-host.
Okay.
No, you are a co-host. If it's not working, Jack, I can do it for you. There we go.
There we go. There we are.
Okay.
So right up front, I would like to warn everybody, there is a big difference between generalizations and stereotypes. You know that when talking about a foreign culture, you have to be careful about saying, "Oh, they're all like this" or "they're all like that." That would be a stereotype. A generalization, however, is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm trying to advance again.
I'll do it.
Okay. A generalization never applies to everyone in every situation. It's kind of a first guess. It's a general rule. And the most important thing about a generalization, if you've learned about it, about a foreign culture, and then you start interacting with those people, and you realize, well, this generalization doesn't really apply. It applies to, maybe a small percentage of the people. A generalization can be discarded. You throw it away. You remove it from your brain and from your experience, and you don't use it as a guide after you have found evidence that it doesn't really work. Next slide, Dan. So a stereotype is very dangerous because you apply it to every member of a group without any exception. Like, these people are all like that, those people are all like this. And what's most dangerous about it is it's retained even after your personal experience proves it to be incorrect. Next slide, Dan.
And I have to mention Elizabeth Colbert. I'll just mention the name. This is a perfect illustration.
Okay. Well, here in the U.S., I'll throw an example out at you. I've heard this statement. In the U.S., we have Anglos and we have Latinos, people who grow up speaking English, people who grow up speaking Spanish in their home cultures. Here, the top one is Latinos are closed to outsiders. They only do business among themselves. The next one is trust is important in the Latino community. To do business, you first need to build relationships. Well, obviously, the first one is a stereotype, and the second one is a generalization. It's the one is like a stop sign, and the other is like a sort of like a yield sign. It points you in the direction of where you should go in a cautious way, and that is critical for the deeper understanding and deeper appreciation for a particular culture. Next one. So what is culture? Let's look at it. Next slide, Dan. It's the way of life. It is what makes you who you are within the society that you grew up in. It's those deep, important things, your values, your beliefs, and also your behaviors. It's what people pass down from one generation to the next through learning. Now, who gives you your culture? First and foremost, your parents and your family, your community, your teachers, perhaps your religious leaders, and also your peer groups. Now, we're only talking about broader culture. If you work in government, if you work in the military or whatever, you may experience different organizational cultures. Like here in the U.S., the military will act in a different way than the civilians, or the private sector will do things differently than in government. That's for a different day. We're not talking about that. So next slide. How the process of learning a culture is called enculturation. It's how you learn your primary culture. Now, Fish do not see the water they swim in. I have I'm staying at my sister-in-law's house. I have a little cat trying to get in the back door. Hope you don't mind the little noise. He's banging on the door. He says, "What's going on in there? I want to be part of the class." Um, I once mentioned to one of my colleagues that the only place I could think of where there was no cross-cultural conflict would be Easter Island in the South Pacific, and because it was just one island and people lived there for 1,000 years, and they didn't have any other culture to deal with until the Spanish arrived. And then one of my historian colleagues said, "Oh, you didn't understand. There were two tribes on the island, and they would occasionally fight with each other." I said, "Well, I guess we just yearn for conflict." But the great thing about interaction with other cultures is we understand ourselves better when we interact with people who are different. It's like looking in a mirror. Now, next slide, Dan. Then some of us have engaged, I think most of us who are looking at this right now have engaged in a process called acculturation, which is learning a secondary culture. This does not mean, like the process of being a tourist where you're a short-term visitor, you just stay there long enough to, look at the pretty buildings, go to a museum, whatever. No, this is usually entails learning a foreign language, living in a country long enough to feel, quote unquote, at home. That is, are you comfortable enough so that when you're walking down the street, you feel at home in that foreign environment? Next slide, Dan. So how do cultures clash? On an internal level, there are many different kinds. There's culture shock, which is when you're confused. It causes great fatigue and a significant amount of disorientation. You feel this inside. When you're thrust into a foreign culture, you're living in a place you're not used to. It's very disconcerting. Then after you've accultured, you've gone through the acculturization process, and you come back to your home environment, you may experience reverse culture shock, which is also confusing and in some ways even more of a shock than culture shock, because you suddenly do not feel entirely at home in your own home environment. I personally, I can tell you, I mean, my first overseas post in the Foreign Service was China, and I don't ever think I expected culture shock there because I expected to be shocked every day. It was just so incredibly different. And I had no reverse culture shock when I came back to the United States because I said, "Hey, this is what the world's supposed to be like." Quite to my surprise, I did experience culture shock and reverse culture shock when I lived in Germany, my second overseas post, because I expected the Germans to be basically like Americans speaking German, and it turned out that they were very different. They were not a lot like me. They had a different way of thinking, which surprised me. And when I came home, I said, "Oh, why are the cars driving so slowly? And how come we're not using, how come we don't have a more orderly society here in America?" Reverse culture shock. Um, the Also, the third kind of internal culture shock is the experience of third culture kids, which some of you may be. These are people who travel around the world on a regular basis. The children of diplomats, the children of international business people, the children of people who, for one reason or another, go from country to country to country. And maybe they'll be in an international school, maybe they'll be in a local school, but they grow up never feeling entirely comfortable anywhere. As there are tremendous advantages to this. They tend to be very flexible, very observant, and they feel, in a sense, they're at home in. I once asked one friend of mine who was a true third culture kid. He grew up in 5 different countries until he was age 21. I said, "Where do you feel at home?" And he said, "Oh, the airport." Um, Here in the U.S., one of the classic examples of someone who is a third culture kid is one of our presidents, President Obama, who grew up in Hawaii, a very multicultural environment, lived in Southeast Asia, was exposed to many different cultures, and like many of his counterparts, He was flexible. He was very observant. He was at home in many, he felt at home in many different places. But there are certain disadvantages to this too. One is that people who are third culture kids tend to be overly analytical and somewhat distant in their personal relationships, which is exactly what people would say about him. Then we get to external cross cultural clash, and that is cross-cultural conflict, which we can talk about right now. Next slide. So this is the famous iceberg analogy. This is how we look at culture, and I want you to think about culture at like a great big iceberg floating in the ocean. Some of you may know that only 10% of the iceberg is above the surface. So there you are on your little boat looking at, that's you up there, looking at the tip of the iceberg. What's that part of culture? That's the external things that you see. Dress, maybe the food you eat, how you greet someone. Do you shake hands or do you bow? Mannerisms, and to a certain extent, body language. Those are all on the outside. And they can be changed relatively easily. Someone who goes, I mean, I used to fly back and forth to the Middle East quite a bit. And, like I'd be flying into Doha or, Abu Dhabi or Bahrain or wherever. And usually about 2/3 of the way through the flight or within an hour or so after we were about to land, the young women in the plane, some of the young men as well, would be, they'd be Western dressed, they'd be wearing jeans, maybe a sweatshirt, sweater, whatever, and they would get up, they'd go back to the private area near the toilets, and they would change into local clothing and instantly suddenly look like they're from where we were about to land. That's the external side. But underneath, the bigger part of the iceberg that's underwater is your beliefs, your values, the symbols that you consider to be important in life, what you would say really matters. Now, question, where do icebergs usually crash into each other? Well, beneath the surface, beneath the surface. How do you counter this? Next slide, Dan. If you're an international traveler, you're going around the world, you can learn all sorts of there are books out there, there are articles out there that you can read. This series, Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands, is a great book for people who want to learn about how to act in a particular culture. Unfortunately, these focus almost exclusively on behavior, but not on the why, more on the how. The same thing for the Culture Shock series. Next slide. What we really want is a deeper understanding. The goal is cultural empathy and understanding. This is not judgmental. This is also not accepting. You don't have to accept the other culture as right or consider your culture to be wrong. It's not judgmental in any way. It's simply understanding how the other culture works so that you can be professionally effective. Now we're going to do a really, really quick overview of the history of where the study of cross-cultural communication came from. This is my friend Ibn Khaldun. He lived in what's now Tunisia between 1332 and 1406. He was the father of historical sociology. This is a man who only traveled in a very relatively small area between like what is today Tunisia and what is now Egypt. But he observed something really interesting, even back in these hundreds of years ago, when people were interacting in an environment that was not the one that they grew up in. And what he saw living in a city was that rural people from the countryside who had come in to do business into the city, had a different way of acting. If they were traditional or rural, they did things differently than the people in the cities and vice versa. The most important thing that he noticed that was different was the pace and the content of communication. That is, the people from the countryside were always surprised at how quickly everything worked. And this would be like like Dan's friend, the American diplomat in Spain, who couldn't figure out that you had to wait till dessert to talk about business. The people from the countryside were always, they want to chat, they want to talk, they want to interact, and they wouldn't get down to business until the last second. Not the experience with their urban counterparts. Next slide, Dan. This is a German scholar named Ferdinand Tönnies who wrote a fascinating book called Community versus Society. He made the same observations in Germany. Most of his studies were in southern Germany. And what he saw was that he was looking to the area where people lived and the way they interacted with each other and also with power. What he found was that the power that made people act a certain way, that kept them in check, kept them from doing bad things, was different in a small town or a rural area and in a big city. In a small town or a rural area, your culture is different because your behavior is controlled by peer pressure, by your neighbors and what they think about you. He called this, in German, community or Gemeinschaft. And so it was very different from the cities where there was top-down authority. There was less interaction among individuals. And so as a result, the government and the police had to play a greater role in controlling people's behavior. Next slide, Dan. Here we have Edward Hall, who's famous. He's the guy who in the 1960s actually came up with the iceberg analogy that I just showed you a little while ago. And his focus was on how nonverbal communication is subconsciously learned in societies, in cultures, and how those were different in different countries and in different segments of society in different countries. He looked at things like eye contact and social distance and comfort zones, and talked about the difference, hearkening back to what Ibn Khaldun had written about the difference between what makes you who you are and how you fit, how you interact with your home culture. Now, we're going to talk about just one cultural continuum. There are many, but this is the big one that most people talk about. Next slide, Dan. And Dan mentioned this, the to-do culture versus the to-be culture. As I said, there are many kinds, but this cultural continuum is the one that has certainly been studied the most. In a to-do or modern culture, this is called a low context culture. People interact with each other in a different way than in a to-be culture, which is where you just are who you are. And this is a high context culture. It can be called also a traditional culture as opposed to a modern culture. It gets a little scary. Labels are difficult in this business because what's modern and what's traditional, people think of good and bad, and it's not. It's just it is what it is, and you learn what it is. In a to-do culture or a modern culture, the focus is more on individual achievement, while in a to-be culture, it's on your affiliation with your neighbors. Your status in modern culture is earned as opposed to just ascribed. It's what you were born with. There's more of a focus on competition as opposed to on cooperation. Next slide, Dan. Also, there's more of a focus on equal opportunity and individualism in a low context culture, and in a high context culture, inequality is often more accepted, and there's more of a focus on collectivism. This next one is one of my favorites. The difference between guilt and shame. Oh, Dan, go back.
Sorry. When you said next, it
sorry.
triggered me. Sorry.
I wanted that next slide to be a surprise. Gosh.
It is. It will be. Everybody,
expunge
forget
it
what
from
you
your
just
mind.
saw. Forget it. Yeah.
There's the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is individual. I feel bad because I did something wrong. Shame is collective. I feel bad because I have shamed my family and my group or whatever my affiliative group might be. There's much more of a focus in modern culture on what's next, on the future, and in the traditional culture on what is past. Now, Please remember that the general guide, this is only a general guide. Exceptions abound. There are many differences between different cultures. There is no right or wrong culture. But you can learn about this by just walking up to someone and saying, "Who are you? Who are you?" Now, people where I grew up, the first thing they would say is their name, and then they would usually say what they do for a living. I am Jack. I am a teacher. I am Jack. I am a business person. I am Jack, whatever. In a traditional culture, they're more likely to say, I am Jack. I am the son of Joseph. I grew up in this town. And and then they'll start telling you about their family. That's a more traditional or high context culture. Now don't change this yet. Now, Dan, I do want
Be
to
assured,
do this
be
for fun.
assured.
Okay.
Yeah.
People from different parts of the world will look at things and relate and interrelate them very differently. And I'm gonna give two examples that are quite visual. And I'm gonna show you this slide. And then when I each of the slides that we're going to be talking about has three pictures. And I want you to say which of those pictures relate the most to each other. Okay, change it. There we go. So, okay, I'll give you 5 seconds to think, and now cement that answer in your mind. Here is the really fascinating thing. These pictures have been shown to literally tens of thousands of people around the world. And what they have found is that in some cultures, people relate the two animals, the panda and the monkey, to each other. In other cultures, people will relate the monkey to the bananas. The fascinating thing is that if you are in Europe or North America, you are more likely, or two-thirds of people, more than two-thirds of people, will say that the two animals belong together. Why? Because they're animals. If you are in East Asia, South Asia, or Sub-Saharan Africa, two-thirds of people will say that the monkey and the bananas belong together because of nourishment. That's what monkeys eat, bananas. And a fascinating thing, if you are in the Middle East or in Latin America, it's 50-50. There's no difference.
Jack. Jack, we're not getting your audio. Let's see. We've lost Jack. Let's see if Jack comes back. I'm guessing Jack can hear me. He needs to know we cannot hear you, Jack. It would be your internet connection. Jack, the screen shows you as unmuted. Aha, your video is also frozen. Let's give Jack, I can advance these slides, folks. It would be better if Jack does it. By the way, he's in he's in New England today, where there's there's a hurricane off the coast of the United States, which has reached New England. It's called a nor'easter. This is a special storm. It could be affecting his internet connection. Let's see. Let's give it another minute. I can explain some of what's coming. And let's see, Jack. It's a pity. What I might do, folks, is send him a separate invitation. Oh, here comes Jack again. Okay. Jack, are you with us? Jack Zetkulic. Okay, I'm going to send him another.
Dan, how you doing?
Yes, you're back. How good to have you back. Where have you been? Where have you been? You've been traveling. No, we know that your internet is an issue today. Very glad that you're back. Jack, go ahead.
here. I'm in beautiful Connecticut, and we have a storm. I think we lost the internet. Can you hear me okay? And can we still advance slides?
Absolutely. Yep.
Oh, this is so wonderful because I'm just on my phone. Okay. Can you hit the next slide?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So there's the first picture. There's the first picture. We have a cylinder of wood. Go on, Dan. And there we have two more pictures. Which of those fit together? Which of those interrelate with each other the best? So you have a cylinder of wood, a cylinder of plastic, and a block of wood. Again, and fascinatingly, if you're in Western Europe or North America, 2/3 of people will say that the two cylinders belong together because of their shape. If you're in East Asia or South Asia, the people will say that the two wood objects belong together. Why? Because of texture and the substance that they're made out of. I'm telling you, there are people who get PhDs in writing why.
So that's already been done. I guess you'll have to do something else.
Next slide, Dan. Very briefly, I'll go through a couple of yellow and red flags, and I'm sure some of you have experienced these. Physical comfort zones, the distance between yourself and other people. What is comfortable and what is not. Now, I'm going to ask you all to stick out your arm. Stick it, whichever. It can be a left arm or a right arm. It doesn't matter. Okay. Now, you're sticking it straight out. Now, I'd like you to put that arm against your body and think of someone rubbing up against your arm, just touching it. You are in China. You are in South Asia, and you are comfortable. If you are in several other countries, you are not comfortable. Okay, now stick your arm out again, all the way. Bend it, so you're just sticking out the elbow. Welcome to Western Europe. Welcome to much of the world, actually. You're in Western Europe, North America, to a certain extent, Latin America. Someone standing right there next to you, an elbow's length away, is okay. Stick your arm out all the way, and you're in sort of Germanic Europe, and you're in England. That's a good distance. Now, if you wiggle your fingers and you imagine someone just beyond your wiggling fingers, welcome to Scandinavia, because that's the distance you want someone else to be, because they should be far away from you and not too close. It's just different. Eye contact is a really important issue in most cultures. The length of time that you are allowed to look into someone's eyes while talking with them is dramatically different in different cultures. Here in the United States, if you are being disciplined, if my dad were to get mad at me when I was a kid, and he was saying, you did a bad thing, you punched someone on the street, or you fought with your little brother or whatever, and I was not looking at him, he would say, look at me, young man, look at me when I'm talking to you. However, if my family was Latin American, was Hispanic, and I was looking straight at my father while he was disciplining me, he would probably smack me in the head. Why? Because in that culture, when you are being disciplined, you look down at the ground. You do not look into the eyes of someone who is telling you what to do.
And my only interruption, I promise. This becomes a very tragic matter in the instance of enslaved Africans in the American South. Many African cultures show respect by not looking at a person.
Yes.
The slave masters in the southern states of the U.S. saw it the exact opposite way. And you can imagine the tragic misunderstandings and the consequences.
Yeah.
This is due to the ignorance of the owners of the enslaved people.
Yeah. Touch is very important. Holding hands, touching hands, shaking hands. I'll give you a personal example that I think pretty much says it all, and it's kind of entertaining. For about 5 years after I retired from the Foreign Service, I trained young diplomats from the United Arab Emirates, and I would go to Abu Dhabi and Dubai pretty frequently, and I trained them here in Washington and over there as well. And I became good friends with one of the young men in my class. He visited my home for dinner, and I visited him there. We'd go out to dinner, and we just talk about how things are going and what his next assignment would be, that sort of thing. They built a brand new, beautiful, big foreign ministry building with a big security good security, and a big guest entry area. And I was going to have a meeting with him and see how he was doing. And so I hadn't seen him in a while. I showed up at the security gate. And I walked in, I introduced myself, and there he was. And he walked up to me, and he held both of my hands in his hands. He touched his nose to my nose, which is how men in that culture will often say hello to their good friends. And then he held my hand, and he walked with me all the way through the security area, across the big plaza to the main entrance, held my hand as we walked up 3 flights of stairs to his office, held my hand as he walked down his office, greeting his colleagues, and walked into his office, and we sat down. He knew that he was making me uncomfortable because I am a Western man who does not want another man to hold my hand. I knew that he was making me uncomfortable, but I also knew, and he knew, that by holding my hand and walking me through all those people and seeing us holding hands, that he was my friend and he trusted me, and that I could be trusted as a colleague. So, classic example of a cultural empathy that was overcome in a professional setting to get to where we wanted to be, which is him showing, hey, Jack's a good guy. You can work with him. Verbal versus non-verbal non-communication. Of course, that comes to often gestures, which are different. You have to learn them if you're going to be in a new culture. Humor is a red flag. Can I just tell you that if you're in a new culture, don't tell any jokes. They don't work. It's the last thing. It's the absolute last thing that you can get right when you're living in a new culture. The chances are, if you try early on, you'll get it wrong, and you might offend somebody. I'll add to this yellow flags, the challenge of silence. There are many cultures in which silence is where you build trust and energy. Not where I grew up. Where I grew up, we do it's called, actually has a name, it's called cooperative overlapping speech. In other words, where I grew up, which is in the New York area and here in the United States, people talk over each other all the time. And it even drives crazy people from the United States who aren't from that area, because you're supposed to wait for someone to finish before you start talking. But we talk over everybody. Why? Because we're assuming that what they're saying is something we're going to agree with anyway. We just want to get on with the next conversation. Time and punctuality are very different. When I lived in Switzerland, it was very like, my wife had worked previously in Nicaragua, and she would always laugh because we'd say a dinner at our house at 6 o'clock, and she'd look out the little peephole, and at 5:59, and she'd look at her watch. She'd say, "It's 5:59. Let's see who's waiting outside." And there would be 3 or 4 couples standing there outside our door, waiting to hit the doorbell at exactly 6 o'clock. It was something that was completely different from her experience in, of course, Nicaragua. Last bit is some people will say that the one thing that communicates well across cultures is a smile. And that is a very sweet thing to say, but it's not always right. Sometimes smiling is, you might be smiling a bit too much. I have to tell you, I did have one Russian diplomat goof on me once when I worked with the OSCE, and he said, I can always tell the Americans in the room, they're the ones who are always smiling like idiots. And I just looked at him, and of course I said, well, maybe we have more to smile about. Next slide. Let's talk just briefly about the professional applications. Next slide. Of cross-cultural communication. Here we have a couple people talking, and this is the example that I gave early on about my Swedish counterpart. In between our monthly meetings that lasted exactly 60 minutes, how did we communicate with each other? fax machine, and phone. Now, if you are in Sweden, that's fine. However, if you're in Italy, if you're in Spain, if you're in Greece, if you're in most of the high context world, you'll need to spend a little more time getting to know somebody. Next slide, Dan. Now, this, I hope you can all see this. It's this is built on the work of a guy named Gerrit Hofstede, who's a Dutch researcher. Some of his work is a little bit dated. It comes from the 1960s, 1970s, but he came up with five levels of cultural interaction. What he called the distance between the individual and power, individualism versus collectivism, what he called masculinity. And of course, that he's from the 1960s, 1970s. I would not call it masculinity. I would just call it supportive behavior as opposed to assertive behavior. And then uncertainty avoidance. That's your willingness to take risks in a society. And then what he called Confucian dynamism, which is your willingness to work in the towards short-term goals or more long-term goals. Now, I put together this slide because a few years back I was asked to go train people in Saudi Arabia who were getting ready to host the G20 conference, and I was trying to explain to a bunch of people, many of whom who had never left their home country, what it was like to interact with different cultures. And I picked a couple of the G20 countries: Germany, the UK, the United States, Korea, India, and China. And I went back through Hofstede's research, and I put those basic culturals, again, generalizations, but on all of these continua. And as you can see, if you are going to be dealing with people from these different cultures, there's going to be a very different approach to, for instance, planning what goals you might set. Someone if you look down at the bottom, you've got the British, the Germans, the Americans who think pretty much short term. Some people say in the U.S. that political leaders only think between now and tomorrow's newspaper. Others will say, "Oh, now in the next election." But if you're Chinese, you think in terms of centuries. You don't think in terms of decades or years or months. If you look at individualism, which is the second one down, you can see that the Koreans and in this case, the South Koreans and the Chinese have a more collectivist approach, whereas Americans and Brits focus much more on the individual. While interestingly enough, the Germans are closer to the Indians, right in the middle. One of the more telling examples is way up on the top of power distance. That is, this is how you perceive an individual's relationship to a political authority. And of course, you've got Germans, Brits. The Germans would have been way over to the right, in the 1930s. Now, after several decades of living in a democratic society and being quite more open and more welcoming, you've got the Germans, the Brits, and the Americans. They have a more distributed power structure. That is, they spread power out among different institutions and groups, whereas the Chinese and the Indians in this case are much more comfortable saying, "Okay, power is in one space, and we will respect that power." These kind of approaches, I mean, if you look at where people are on these different cultural continua, they might answer some of your questions. Here in the United States, for instance, there's a big debate about nationalized health care. And some people will say, "I want to be able to choose my doctor. I want to be able to choose, everything. I want to do it all myself." And they'll say, "I don't want there to be a national healthcare system like there is in the UK." And then if you're talking with say a Chinese diplomat in a negotiation, well, maybe their policy goals might not make sense to you because you're thinking about what's happening tomorrow or next week, whereas the Chinese might think about, what's going on in the next year. We're going to go to the next slide, Dan. This is a fun one. This is cultural and fundamental assumptions. and I took as examples. I never use Saudi Arabia as an example because I never talk about the host country. I let them figure that out for themselves. But the people in the class were quite open about it. I used India and Japan. And we'll just go down these slides. If you're working with an Indian person or a Japanese person, they'll have different views than you might have. We talk about, what's the importance of words, and how do you communicate, and how do you work together as a team, and how do you negotiate with each other. You'll see, for instance, I can't go through all of these because of time, but you'll see that on the Indian side, when the words that you say are not necessarily final, they are less important. And a Japanese would say, "Hey, we made an agreement; it's final. This is a commitment." And so there might be a cultural clash. An Indian might come back after a meeting and say, "Well, I've been thinking about that. Maybe we should do the following thing." And the Japanese would say, "We already agreed. Why are you breaking your word?" In terms of teamwork, for instance, an Indian would say, "The team is there for me. I am part of the team." But the Japanese would say, "I am here for my team." It's a more collectivist approach. I love the one on silence. Now, I am definitely more of an Indian than a Japanese in that sense. In silence in an Indian environment. I mean, go sit in an Indian restaurant, or go hang out with an Indian friend, or with their family. Silence is emptiness. It's a vast empty hole that must be filled with noise, whatever that might be. If you go to Japan, silence is a period of consolidation, of a way to develop your mental strength. I have been in meetings with I've had meetings in Tokyo a few years ago where people would just kind of be quiet for a while, even at a dinner. They would just kind of sit for a while and go, and you can see they're thinking, and they're not ignoring you, but they're just taking a moment and taking a pause. If I were sitting with my Indian counterparts, there would be 5 people at the table talking at the same time. The way you have friendships, the way you develop a relationship with someone is very different in both societies. In India, you say, "Oh, I met him. We talked once. I consider him a friend." In Japan, you say, "Well, I've spoken with him about 10 times. I really need to know I need to get to know him better to be a true friend." Very different, very different backgrounds, very different cultures. Arguing was one of my favorites, and it's one of those things that says a lot about the culture. And there are people who've done studies on the way people argue in different cultures, and the way they avoid arguments. In this case, in the Indian culture, and certainly in the one I grew up into, an argument is fun. It's a way to add value to the relationship. It creates excitement and new ideas. It probably goes all the way back to if you read Gandhi, he would say that there was this thing called satyagraha, which is the power of truth, and every individual has a little bit of it, and when they interact with each other, that truth is multiplied. It comes out. It evanesces out of the interaction between the two people. So it's that clash of individuals that actually creates excitement, knowledge, and truth. If you're in a Japanese culture, an argument is uncomfortable. It damages the relationship. It's just a different way of looking at the world. The last one I'll call attention to is the way people react to rules. And in the Indian interpretation, rules, they usually apply. Some are less important. On the Japanese side, a rule is a rule, no exception, and all are important. It's just a different way of interacting. Now, the last slide that I'll show you is just a fun one. This is something that you see if you're working in a multicultural environment. I see it in international organizations, especially. My office happens to be right next to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank in Washington. And it's just hilarious seeing the different cultures in the various coffee shops around the IMF, because people will sometimes take work with them, or they'll sit and talk, or they'll find a quiet place and do something, or talk on the phone. If these are two generic individuals, one from the West and one from the East, can I tell you a secret? The one from the West is British, and the one from the East is from Korea, from South Korea. And this is a test, or I should say an experiment, that has been given literally tens of thousands of times in different cultures. And this one is the most telling and the most dramatic, because they would give both individuals from two different cultures a puzzle to put together. In almost 80% of the time, the Westerner will put together the puzzle and talk to him or herself while doing it. They'll say, "Oh, this goes here, this goes there. Oh, wait a minute, I should put this over." And they'll talk with themselves while doing the test. Switch over to the Easterner, the person from an Eastern culture, and they will sit in complete silence about 80 to 90% of the time while putting together the puzzle. Put these people together in an office. Imagine, an office building with 100 cubicles in it, and you've got a Brit sitting here, and a Canadian over there, and a German, and a South African, and a Pakistani, and an Australian, and a Vietnamese, all working in different cubicles. Can you imagine how much fun it would be to videotape all of the interactions? It's just absolutely entertaining and so much fun. But that's Dan. I got through all my slides. I'm very, very proud of myself, and I saw a lot of really cool comments pop up. You might want to curate those if you have any comments you might want to pass along to the group, or we could have people give some examples for themselves of.
This is great. Jack, let me just say, these are things we thought we knew, but we didn't. And this is enormously helpful. It's not always easy to keep these principles at the top of our minds, but you've made it much easier. Actually, I guess the lesson is, don't assume when you're dealing with someone of a different culture, don't assume anything, because a lot of the behavior and beliefs are not what you're accustomed to. Jack has emphasized this is not a value judgment. I think everybody understands that. Things are just different. Now, yes, a fascinating series of chats. Boniface has a raised hand. Let's go to Boniface while we're looking at some of the chats. Okay, Boniface.
Yeah, hello, Dr. Whitman, and thank you, Jack, so much for the very fascinating presentation, very educative. I just wanted to get your perspective on the power dynamics between cultures, because, for example, in Kenya, we're a very multicultural society, but we have, over the years, there's some tribes, some communities that have sort of emerged as the more dominant culture, and that tends to rub off on the rest of the cultures, so that we start to behave a certain way. Where do you place that in this dynamic?
That is a very, very good point. I like you. I live in a multicultural country. People used to say that the United States was a melting pot, that everybody would just become the same. And I think a better analogy is more like a stew or a goulash, in the sense that you've got different people. You get a little piece of meat over here and a potato over there and some vegetable over there, but there's a gravy that keeps it all the same basic flavor. People, when they grow up in a genuinely multicultural environment, don't perceive the changes over time, because they tend to be rather gradual. I mean, unless your country is invaded by somebody. But I think the same was the case in Kenya over time, where you have different groups, as you say, taking control and having more control. Cultures evolve; they have to when they interact with other cultures. One of the commentators said Kenyans never say no. Well, I'm sure some Kenyans do. But not all of them. That is how culture has evolved over time. What often happens in a colonial environment, or an environment where a country has suddenly had a dominant culture imposed upon it from above, is people they learn to live in two environments. There's the home environment, their original environment, and then there's the one in which they interact with authority, and they have to learn to speak both ways. To interact well with their friends, their colleagues, their compatriots who are like them, and then with whatever authoritative group. So it could be linguistic, or it could be the way you speak with someone. If it's like, if I get pulled over by a policeman for speeding, I'm going to talk to him in a different way than if I'm just chatting with my friends. You show more respect. You're more careful with your language. You're very deferential. It's unfortunate, but also becomes part of culture. Dan mentioned the experience of enslaved peoples. It was the same thing. And you have here in the U.S. developed over time different linguistic patterns, the way people interact with each other, and a different relationship with authority.
Jack is responding to Frida Gnocchi's chat. I would add to that. When I worked in South Africa, I had a fantastic local employee, Klaas Skosana. And I noticed that when we conversed, there would always be a pause. I would say something. He would always have the right answer. He would have he gave me great wisdom, and he always gave me the right guidance and how to navigate a situation locally. But there was always a pause. And I imagined, well, I'm speaking English. In his mind, he's translating what I've said first into Afrikaans and then into a local language. Years later, he explained to me that wasn't the reason at all. What was the reality was that when he underwent a traditional initiation rite, he was taught that in any situation of importance, always pause before speaking. That was a tremendous revelation to me. And I understood it wasn't that he was going through some complicated translating process in his mind. It was that he was trained in a traditional initiation that wisdom comes from silence, moments of silence. I think Daria was up next, and then we'll get to Sean. Daria?
Yeah, thank you very much for this really interesting lecture. I think all of the students today enjoy it. And the question that came up to my mind is that maybe you saw some examples where culture misunderstandings could lead to the conflicts or some very I don't know.
I can
Some
give you
situations where this.
Daria's audio is coming through a bit sketchy. Jack, did you get the essence of it?
I'll give you a personal example. When I was 19 years old, I was an exchange student in Germany, and that was right when the first Star Wars movie came out, and I saw the original in New York City, and in English, and then I went to see just a month or two later. I was in Germany, and I saw it in a German movie theater. I would guess that most of you have seen Star Wars. At the end of Star Wars, the big event is that they have this thing called a Death Star, and the Death Star can blow up an entire planet and destroy it. I lost a girlfriend because of this. This is important. I was in the movie, and in the American movie theater, when the Death Star is destroyed by the young hero, everyone applauds. They go, "Yay!" In the German theater, there was stone silence. No, oh, okay. I guess this must be the end of the movie. And everyone walked out. And I was there walking with my friends, including this girl I was trying to impress. And I said, "What the hell is wrong with you people? Why didn't anyone applaud?" I know you tend to be more reticent in public. You're not as effusive as Americans are, but why didn't you applaud? And they said, and one of the fellows I was with said, "Well, it's such a destruction of such an incredible piece of technology. Why didn't the rebels just take control of the Death Star so they could use it themselves?" And I looked at him and I said, "Because the Death Star is evil. Its only purpose is to destroy planets." And he said, "Oh yeah, but it would solve a lot of problems." And I said, "Well, you Germans tend to solve problems in ways that might not be considered the best way." And well, the rest of the night was not as comfortable as it could have been.
I can add to that. A Japanese American friend said to me, "You must see the latest Godzilla movie." So we went with her boyfriend and me, and I suddenly I understood the Godzilla movies, this was the trauma of the defeat of World War II, when a profound trauma on a culture which saw itself as resilient and capable. And I guess the humiliation of being defeated in World War II, Godzilla, I guess, was subconsciously was the United States. So to just supplement what Jack is saying, even a reaction to a fantasy movie does have cultural undertones.
And I know many of you are, I mean, I know from the very first class with Ukrainians onward, I know some of the many of the Ukrainian students were living in places that were not their hometown. We had people in Finland, Poland, Germany. We had one in Pakistan. Remember, Dan?
Yep.
And they all would tell of their experiences of what it was like to be in this very new environment. It's a challenge, but it's also a tremendous opportunity to get to know not only the new culture you're living in, but to get to know yourself. Because it's like you look in a mirror every day and go, "Oh, this is why I do the things I do, and why it's different from the other folks around me."
I'm looking at the chats. Oh, here's again from Frida Gnocchi, who gave us an earlier comment. When Hillary Clinton visited Somalia, the biggest debate was if or not they will shake hands with the Somalian president. I didn't know that. Thank you, Frida. We know that Hillary Clinton made every effort. She was trained. When she met Vladimir Putin, and she wanted to use this term, a restart button, and she got it wrong. She used the wrong word, Perigrushat or Grusit, I forget, and she became a laughingstock because she tried to assimilate to that culture, but did not succeed. Thank you, Frida. That's interesting. Big question. Should Hillary Clinton shake hands as a woman with a Muslim head of state? That's a good one. Sean is back with us. Sean?
I just mentioned one quick one, Dan. When I was training my Emirati students in Washington, D.C., about a third of my students were young women. And we had a reception at the UAE embassy where the ambassador came down. He's a very savvy guy, very, very smart man, Ambassador Otaiba, who's still there as ambassador. And we had a reception, and several of the young Emirati women would put their hand on their chest like this and do a little nod instead of shaking hands. And he reached out his hand and said, "You're an international diplomat now. Get used to shaking hands." And I was like, "Okay, this is part of your job. You may not be comfortable with it, but you better get used to it."
Let's take Sean's comment as the last one, and then we can sum up. Sean, are you there?
Yes, good evening.
Yes, good to see you, Sean.
Yes, good evening from our side and good morning from your side. My question I think is partly answered, but it's more on the fact that when you come from a very cultural diverse place, maybe where you're in a country and there's so many different types of cultures, is there a way in which as time goes by, those cultures are able to merge, or do you think that they still remain unique and then a new one is created?
That's a
That's
great question. That's
Yeah.
a great question. Only Jack could even tackle such a question.
I do think that for a long time they walk side by side, and in many cases they stay walking side by side forever. And I think it's rare that you have a genuine blend, a completely new culture that is created by a merging of all the different cultures. We still carry with us lessons that our ancestors learned, and it could go through. You don't even know it's there, but it's a generational thing. And I think it's rare that maybe Dan would disagree. I don't know, but I think it's rare that you would have a genuinely new, completely new culture in a generation or two. Over centuries, yes, definitely, but not immediately.
No, I won't differ with that. But as Jack has said, even Ibn Khaldun, I think he would have said, take a person from a rural background, put that person in a city, and that person's behavior might change. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah.
Jack, you pointed out to us, this is serious stuff. When you get it wrong, you lost a girlfriend, for example. You could lose a deal if you're in Japan. On the other hand, isn't it fun? It's tremendous fun to become conversant in these things. And, it's fun to confront or to be in the presence of another culture. It's why we have the charm of travel. Thank you, Yevgeny. The word that Hillary Clinton got wrong was perigrushka, which she was trained. By the way, I've talked to the people who were trying to train her, and they were trying to. Uh, it's a single Russian word. They worked with her for months, and she couldn't get it. She used the word perigrushka, which is overload, not reset. Perizagrushka, I think, was the word she was looking for. Jack, thank you so much. And by the way, we're going to get more of Jack a week from today. He's going to go through, it's amazing what he can do in an hour and a half. The history of U.S. diplomacy, which, by the way, is actually a history of the United States. It's a sneaky way of getting the entire thing. I've heard this before. I can't wait to hear it again. It's rich with images and with challenges, and we know that we're not here to say that America is a perfect example or even a good example, but it's a country that everybody in the world thinks about. Everybody has an opinion, positive or negative, and even as it encounters the troubles that we're in now, it's really imperative to have some idea of where it came from, and that's what Jack is going to explain next Monday. This Wednesday, for anybody's welcome. If you understand Ukrainian, and if you're not Ukrainian, you're very welcome to listen to the judge, Elena Fonova. That's going to be a great session, 10 o'clock Wednesday. The next day, Thursday, at 10 o'clock, an event of some importance. Marvin Kalb, who's 95 years old and whose memory is better than Jack's and mine's put together, and who spoke to Nikita Khrushchev on the eve of what would have been an atomic war in 1962, when Marvin was the CBS television correspondent in Moscow, who actually met Khrushchev by coincidence at an opera and got a sneak preview of what was going to happen the following day. Could have been a nuclear war. And as we know, that did not happen. Marvin Kalb, some of us grew up with him in the second half of the 20th century. He was and is an incredible journalist and observer and philosopher. I'm going to put some pictures on the screen. He's an author of 12 books. The latest one is called The Different Russia. And in that latest book, which came out late last year, he talks about the behavior of the Soviet Union in the 1960s, which was predictable and had some logic in it, to the Russian Federation of today, which has lost the predictability and the logic. And Marvin, like many other observers who've spent their lives studying Russia, is very distraught, very upset, as I think all of us are, I know I am, at what Russia has become. It has become a pretty destructive thing. I'm not trying to preach. I know the United States has done some pretty stupid things, but we need to think about Russia, which has threatened the use of tactical nuclear weapons. I mean, this was never going to happen in the 1960s, and Marvin Kalb has a memory that spans all of that time. Thank you, everybody. Jack, I think you saw in the comments, they loved your presentation. I loved your presentation. And I won't say I love you because Americans don't do that. And we'll just say, see some of you Wednesday, same Zoom link, by the way, same Zoom link, and see everybody on Thursday. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.